Good morning, it's Shanna. This week I want to talk about how to handle difficult, frustrating, uninterpretable tarot readings. The ones where we come to it with a specific question and hope that by pulling cards we can gain an answer or some kind of insight into whatever it is we're asking about. I know that for me, there's been multiple times where I've drawn cards and it literally doesn't make sense in my mind. And it can be really frustrating. And I know for some people, it might be a reason to just sort of give up on tarot, just put it away and write it off as something that doesn't work for you. And I don't know, I feel like I just kind of want to share my tactics when I run into that wall of uncertainty and kind of how to overcome that. So one of the reasons that I feel like this matters is that I think being able to overcome that obstacle can build confidence. It can improve your reading accuracy. It can improve your intuition, how you're getting those images and messages from the cards, and not necessarily how quickly you're able to decipher them or, come to those conclusions, but how deeply you can read into the cards despite what it is and despite how confusing or vague it might seem in the beginning. So some of the common reading challenges that I've run into can be anything from having a completely blank mind when I look at the card, like just literally nothing, despite all of the symbolism. And, some cards definitely, like a pip deck. Okay, let's take that for example. There's just not a lot of imagery to work off of. And so sometimes when you pull that card, you might just be like, well, there's 8 circles on the card and I know nothing. Something else that, when you pull out a spread and you're doing a reading, sometimes you can kind of feel disconnected from it. Like it's not really, maybe it doesn't feel like it's the right time to have asked the question. Maybe you feel like you've pulled too many cards. Maybe it feels like there's a message, but it doesn't feel like it's meant for you in that moment. Sometimes, having that feeling of overwhelm when we're using really big spreads, which I don't tend to do often, but I have done in the past. And I feel like that's kind of its own topic, but using big spreads for me at least has to be an exceptionally intentional, like I have to know that I'm going to be sitting here for an hour really engaging with the cards. Otherwise, I want nothing to do with a large spread because it's just too much. But that can kind of lend into that difficult reading, right? Sometimes if we get the same card repeatedly, that can feel frustrating, especially when it's a confusing card. We don't know what it's trying to say, but it keeps popping up. Or readings that maybe feel unnecessarily negative or scary. I can say that I've had readings that can lean negative, but not since I've learned tarot, have I ever really had a reading that felt scary. That's not to say, other people haven't or won't, but for me, that's not necessarily the case. However, we'll kind of go over some of these obstacles and kind of look at different ways that we can address them. Some of my personal issues with a reading can be distractions. I don't know if you heard it, but the garbage truck just drove by. Sometimes that's going to be a distraction. If you're sitting by a window, you might have neighbors walking by. Maybe you've got the TV going in the other room. Maybe you have your phone next to you that, just keeps binging off notifications. So I'll kind of go into that as well. And then I kind of want to go into technical solutions, interpretation blockages, practical demonstration, which I will pull out just, a deck and we can kind of look over it and decide as we go kind of how we might work through that process. So I'm going to use the Mystical Fairy Tarot just because this is my April deck. This is the one I always pull out for April and it's pretty. So let's jump right into it. So sometimes I'm going to I'm just going to work with one card at a time as we kind of go through these, just to avoid any kind of overcomplicating this, this discussion. So let's say we pull the card. I'm just going to pull the top one here, and actually, I feel like I need to shuffle. I always feel like I need to shuffle. We're going to shuffle so that the card, the deck knows what we're doing here today and our intention behind this video. So one of the frustrating things, oops, wow, that was a really great shuffle. Don't look. One of the frustrating things can be having a completely blank mind. And I don't think I've ever experienced having a blank mind, just like there's nothing there. My mind doesn't usually shut off, so that's not really a thing for me. However, when I pull a card, I can experience having it's like a piece of wax paper is over it, and I have no idea what I'm looking at. And usually in those moments, I have to ask myself, am I in the mood to be doing this reading right now? Am I in the headspace to be doing this reading right now? And so a lot of times just being able to ask myself those questions, whether or not it's out loud or just in my own head, and then being able to answer like, okay, yes, I really want to be here, so I need to focus, right? And so sometimes just the simple act of closing my eyes, taking a few deep breaths, and refocusing and kind of coming back into the headspace to really focus on what I'm looking at in the card, that can be helpful. Now, what if I do pull two cards and let's say they contradict each other? Like, let's say Ace of Pentacles and the Tower. Let's say we pull those two. To me, those seem fairly contradictory. Or, could be potentially contradictory. Like, let's not get too into the weeds with this. But now, depending on the question, you could look at this in a few different ways. You could say this was the past, this is the future, or vice versa. You could say, sometimes, okay, let's say I ask, what can I expect at work today? Let's just go with that. That's been a question that's been on my mind a lot recently. So let's ask that question. What can I expect from work today? So we get the Ace of Pentacles, which for me is kind of that opportunity, that like abundance of like a lot of good things coming your way, right? And then the Tower, which is kind of the opposite of that. So in those moments, I might be like, okay, well, which is it? So I might say, okay, well, how can I lean into this and learn from this? So maybe I might say, okay, how do I lean into this energy? And I would shuffle the deck and I would pull another card. Okay, leaning into the energy, having that innocent, childlike experience of just going into it without any expectations. And then how do I avoid this situation? Shuffle the deck, pull a card, the Sun, looking on the bright side. And you know what? Sometimes these might be a little bit of an eye roll. If that's the first thing that you're thinking, look on the bright side, which can seem somewhat simplistic, but sometimes, you know what? The cards are going to tell it to you like you need to hear, right? Like they're just saying, stop making everything into a catastrophe. Like it's literally not that bad. Look on the bright side, pick out the little glimmers of your day, and stop overreacting. So that's a simple way to kind of overcome these like questionable, like contradictory cards or seemingly contradictory cards. Overwhelm when using complex spreads. So for me, because I feel like we've all done it. We've all created one of these spreads where there's like, I don't know, 10, 12, whatever cards. I'm going to make sure all of these are in frame. We'll just kind of use these same cards as an example. Or let's not. I'll spread these out and we'll use this as kind of a template. Okay, so let's say we shuffle the cards. We've got this complex reading. What should our question be? How can I be a better coworker? So let's say we pull all of these. Okay, well, that's a gigantic answer. And for me, because I'm a list maker, I like to see things all in one place. Spreadsheets only work for me if I can see everything without having to scroll. And so because of that, I would go into my journal, or even just a scrap piece of paper. If this wasn't something that you necessarily wanted to journal, you don't have to use your journal. But what I would do is I would write my question, how can I be a better coworker? And then I would write each of the cards, maybe just in a list with maybe a couple lines in between, or side by side, write Queen of Swords, 10 of Pentacles next to that, 4 of Swords, 2 of Cups next to that, and so on, so that I've got 2 columns. And then I would probably go in and I would write my own keywords for each of these. Queen of Swords, obviously. So then I've just got one keyword under each of these cards on my piece of paper where I can see everything all at once. And from there, I can start building. I might, under the keyword, I might write my reaction to that word. I might write my argument to that word. Maybe where 10 of Pentacles has that, culmination, the legacy, kind of that abundance mindset, I might have an argument for that. Like, okay, well, I don't feel that way at work. Here's my argument to this card. But why did this card come up for me? Even though I feel like I want to argue with it, why is this card coming up for me? And in that way, you can kind of go through each of these cards and either argue the point, debate the point, agree with the point. And once you've and I would keep it simple. Once you've got your keyword for each and you've got your little sentence or two for each of these, then I would sit and ruminate over that. I would see, are there any connections? Are there any ways that the messages flow with each other? And I feel like the more you write, the more you kind of pull those thoughts and ideas out of your head, the easier it is for you to pull this entire reading together and make sense of it. So that would be my suggestion. Those are ways that I do it, rather than, sometimes I'm tempted to, write the first card, Queen of Swords, and write a paragraph about it. And you definitely can. But if you're trying to keep it simple, rather than writing 6 different paragraphs and trying to pick out the pieces that fit, just, really condensing it down to a keyword and then a sentence or 2 for each, and then seeing how it works for you. So if we're getting repeat cards, I feel like this is, I don't know, maybe for you it happens a lot. It does not happen for me a lot, but I can tell you the times that it has happened. I can tell you what cards they are, because it's such a cool, unique, powerful feeling. So let's say you continuously pull, so 9 of Cups, you continuously pull this. What I would do, say you pull this the first day, you write your journaling, or you set it aside, you put it on your altar, you completely ignore it, whatever it is you do with that first pull of this card. The next time you get that card again, I would write it down, write the date, write, the last time you pulled it, was it yesterday? Was it this morning? Was it last week? If you can remember, if that feels relevant, and then just start writing. Honestly, just writing it down, even if it's a simple keyword, a single sentence, the first thing that pops into your mind, does this have to do with work? Is this a relationship? Is this about your house? Is this about your family? Just writing that single keyword, and it doesn't have to be the keyword that you associate with the card, just the keyword that pops into your mind every time you see this card. And then that way, as you go, you can always refer back to it. In 2 weeks, if I pull this card again, I'm going to flip back in my journal or my scrap piece of paper, your sticky note, however you want to keep track of it, and write down the word again and be like, okay, the first thing that comes to my mind, or the thing that's happening today, the thing that feels relevant with this card today, how does that relate to the last time, or the last 2 times, the last 4 times that I've drawn this card? And in that way, you're going to start seeing some kind of pattern. Anyway, that's where I would start, just give it a shot. It doesn't have to be like a full journaling page. It can literally, again, just be that keyword, a single sentence, what you're going through, what you feel like this is referring to, even if it's just in that very moment or that very day. I think you're going to start finding a pattern. Okay, what about readings that feel unnecessarily negative or scary? Again, I've gotten a few that could lean negative, but I haven't had any that are scary. And if you have, I'd love to hear your experience with it. How did you deal with it? Did you deal with it? Honestly, I feel like I'm just going to keep repeating myself with this journaling. I mean, just again, it does not have to be a full drawn out, 8-part paragraph. It can just be a couple of words, a couple of keywords. And honestly, this is a great time. This is a great time to bring up the guidebook, because I would say that probably 8 or 9 times out of 10 tarot decks, if something freaks you out in the reading, if you see it and it's just freaking you out, like you're literally scared, going to the guidebook, I think, is going to bring you back from that ledge. I do. If the Ace of Cups, if you pull this and the first thing you think of is, I don't know what, poison. Let's just say poison for whatever reason. Let's just say we're freaked out about this card. So we're going to pull up Ace of Cups. Let's see. So, I mean, any card that starts with once upon a time probably is not going to be scary. Going through this and getting the author's intent behind the card, I imagine, is probably going to help pull that fear away from you most of the time. So a magical place between the land and the water. Again, if you're feeling like this is something other than water, being able to look at this guidebook and going, okay, no, that's not what the author intended. That's not what the author intended. And if you have to repeat that 14 times, repeat it 14 times. And really, truly absorbing what the author intended with that card. Because you chose this deck for a reason. You chose this deck in this moment for this situation, and this card came out for you in this moment for a reason. So if it's freaking you out, you need to come into the guidebook and take a step back from the cycle that your brain is putting you through right now. So highly recommend the book, especially in those situations where you're spinning out of control. Okay, environmental distractions. I would recommend lighting a candle. Lighting a candle, a scented candle, if that's something you enjoy. I just have one sitting here on my altar. It's patchouli scented. I love it. It's really light. But lighting the candle, and sometimes if, I've shuffled my cards, I've pulled the deck, and I'm just not quite focused, I can light the candle, although most of the time I'm going to light the candle before I do a tarot reading. But being able to sit here and, if you have to close your blinds, mute your phone, turn off the TV in the next room. If someone else is watching it, put a pair of earbuds in your ears. You can put on some really quiet music or just no music, but putting in the earbuds is going to help kind of dull out that sound. And then watch the flame for a couple of minutes. Just really sort of let your mind and your eyes relax and kind of pull yourself back into this space here where you are doing your reading. I think, too, part of distraction is not clearly formulating a question. So sometimes I feel like we come to our tarot space and we have a question, but maybe we're in a hurry. So we just kind of spit out a question, and when we get the cards, it doesn't really make sense because we weren't really sure what we were after. It's like you're speaking a foreign language to the tarot deck. Like sometimes you have to kind of re-speak what you're asking. So let's say we ask, how can I be better understood at work? Okay, let's start there. How can I be better understood at work? Pull these 3 cards, and I'm like, well, while I might understand this on a certain level, maybe it doesn't feel very deep. I would recommend either asking a question, phrasing it as a statement of, I would like to show me how I can be better at X, Y, or Z, instead of how can I be better at, rephrasing it as show me how to be better at. And even then, pulling 3 more cards, oh my goodness, that's funny. Rephrasing the question can sometimes help clarify. It can be as simple as that. And again, writing the question down in your journal, writing the second rephrased question down in your journal, and then popping up, writing down these cards and seeing if there's any correlation between them. I think sometimes we get in our head and we're not really asking what we actually want to know. And I think we have to be really honest with ourselves in those cases. Next is, how do we address a reading when we're emotionally overwhelmed? My advice here would be we don't. I have a pretty firm rule for myself that if I'm in a stage of freak out, if I'm crying, if I'm so angry, I'm shaking, or just having anger in general, like if that anger is in that moment, I don't sit here and pull cards. I might sit here and shuffle cards if that's relaxing to me, but I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just not, because I am the type of person that can sometimes take things literally, and it's only going to make it worse, make my situation worse. It's only going to make me feel worse. So I don't. I find something else to do. Do I go for a walk? Do I watch a show? Do I have a snack? I'm an emotional eater. Like, maybe that's not the best thing to do, but I don't pull cards when I am emotionally overwhelmed. It's just not a healthy practice for me. So if that's something that feels triggering or feels stressful, or you've just found that it doesn't help, don't do it. It's just that simple. We have free will, right? Don't do the thing that's upsetting. Okay, sometimes I will have my question in mind. I'll shuffle the deck. I'll pull the cards, and it just doesn't make sense. I'm like, what does this even mean? I have no idea. I will try doing a different shuffle technique. I'll ask the same question. I like to leave the first card that I pulled out. I feel like that's important. But I'm going to try shuffling, and I'm going to re-ask my question. And then I'm going to pull again. Oh, goodness, upside down. Normally I would keep that upside down, but for the sake of this video, we will not. It's funny that I'm pulling these same cards again. That's funny. I feel very strong. I feel like the point of tarot is that the deck or the card has a message for us. And if we don't feel clear on the answer, it's okay to ask it again. Now, I think some of us have the tendency, I think we have the tendency to continuously pull a card and pull another card and pull another card, etc., until we've got 18 cards on the table, and now we're so overwhelmed we just put the whole thing away and ignore all of the messages that it's given us. So I would say, especially in these moments of being uncertain, in my opinion, I wouldn't pull more than 2. I might pull an oracle. If an oracle is over here kind of whispering at me like, hey, open me up, pull me too, I might pull an oracle. But generally speaking, the less cards, the better for me. Again, pull up in your journal, start writing it down. But having these different shuffle methods, even if it's, fanning the deck, picking a card that feels good. What's the method, this kitchen sink or whatever, where you just kind of ruffle them all up, which we are not going to do because that will really stress me out. Just having a different shuffle method. Sometimes if you've pulled, is that a word? If you've pulled a card and it's not making sense, maybe you just need a second card or a third card, So that's my suggestion for that. Sometimes if I pull a card and it doesn't make sense, maybe I've written a keyword down and I'm sitting here and it just doesn't make sense, I might just put it away. I might just put it away and get a different deck. I try not to do that because, again, I feel like that first deck that calls to us, the one that we initially reached for, there was a reason behind it, but we're human, and they're just cards at the end of the day. Like, if you don't like that message or it's not making sense, it's kind of like calling a second friend. Like, hey, friend 1 said this advice. What do you think? And honestly, sometimes you're going to pull the exact same card in the second deck. And that's when the magic really hits home, because then like beyond a doubt, that message is for you. And sometimes that's the point of needing to pull out a second deck. I don't know. I am here with tarot, playing tarot, shuffling the cards because I believe in the act of reading tarot. I believe in the messages, and I want to make the deck work for me. Like I'm not a slave to these cards. I want them to work for me. They have a job. I've hired them to work for me. I've invited them here in my space. It's not the other way around. And so if I don't feel like a deck is working for me, I am perfectly okay grabbing a second deck and being like, okay, how about you? But again, I would, depending on your personality, I would refrain from pulling more than maybe a second deck would probably be enough. I would not recommend a third one unless you're pulling it in for clarification. And I think clarification can kind of put us in the muddy waters as well, because again, it's just another card. It's another image that our brain is trying to process and pull meaning from. And so I would say be careful with that, how many cards you're pulling in, and be really conscientious of your limits, your own personal limits. Okay, next is how I would break down complex cards into manageable symbols. And I wrote down these little prompts, and do I have a deck here that's complicated? I mean, I don't know. I guess we could pull in the Tilbrook Tarot. I feel like any of the art decks that are sort of abstract, but it doesn't have like a specific image, I feel like those can be a little bit problematic sometimes. They can be. Because instead of having, a cup with the lilies that have a certain meaning and the flower that has a certain meaning, maybe you've just got this. This is your card. This is your message, not literally, obviously. But pulling a message from a deck that has unclear imagery, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. So let's find one on here. Man, I have shuffled these upside down or something. So this, in addition to being like literally unclear, because it's a little bit, whatever, filter they've put on this gives it a little bit of a blurry, I don't know, blurry's not the word, a little bit of a painterly or artistic effect. But there's also a lot here on the card. There's nothing very specific. I feel like maybe this isn't even the right deck. Anyway, I don't know. We're going to keep going. Picking out a specific piece of the card can be very helpful. Is it the picture of this woman? Is it the two turtles up here? Is it this vase of flowers? Is it this pattern on the floor? Is it this pool? Is it a pool? Is it a mirror? I'm going to assume it's like a kind of pool here. There's a ton of things that you can pull from this. Is it the blue sky? I feel like you really need to be in the habit of recognizing, and if that means pulling out a scrap piece of paper, but recognizing the first thing that you see, the first thing that your eye goes to. And then, just scribbling it down. It doesn't have to be fancy. And what does that mean to you? And then moving on. Okay, well, the blue sky, maybe I've just been in a bad mood lately. Maybe I need to, kind of let the clouds pull aside and let that blue sky show. The turtles, do I need to slow down in life? Where they're facing each other? Am I feeding off of someone else's slow energy? The image, is this an ancestor? Is it a mirror of myself? Just picking out these little pieces and being able to really decipher all the little pieces. But even, let's say, sometimes you've got like the Margaret Peterson. That's a very artistic deck, and there's nothing specific generally in those images, but I feel like that would be a great deck for meditation. And I think it can be a great deck when we're feeling overwhelmed because of the simple fact that there aren't things in the image that's going to be distracting. Like we can pull, where she's got her washes of reds and purples and greens on an image. Do you remember those old, I feel like it was late 90s, where those pictures came out and you could go into the mall and you would stare at them and you had to stare at them a certain way and then an image would appear. I feel like that's a good technique can be a good technique in those artistic decks. Letting your eyes relax and finding an image in there. Or, if you're interested in color, like I've been super into colors lately, really just sinking into one of the colors on the card. What does that mean to you? How does that make you feel? What do you associate with that? And really just going with it from that point. Let's say you have a really big spread. Let's say you've got another, 6 cards laid out. So we've got a big spread. We're feeling overwhelmed. Is there a way to simplify this? Yeah, I think there is. The simple, act of stacking cards. And maybe we come back to the ones under there at a later date. Again, you can just stack the cards, So now we've gone from 6 to 2 in just a couple of seconds. It's still part of the story. All the other pieces are still there, but we're honing in on specific pieces, And if this is an important reading, maybe we just focus on this card today, and then tomorrow we pick up the second one, and so on. Maybe it takes us a week to get through each of these cards, and that's okay. Not every reading has to be done in 3 minutes, So I think that's a quick and dirty way to sort of simplify a reading. And then obviously using a tarot journal. I've mentioned that multiple times. I think there are countless ways to use a tarot journal. Keywords, writing down your emotions, writing down just simply listing the cards that you get. I think any of those can be helpful. Okay, let's say you have, again, you've pulled a couple cards and you want to go to the guidebook because you really enjoy the guidebook, or, whatever reason you want to go to the guidebook today. And you read it and it makes 0 sense. It makes even less sense than just looking at the cards. So now you're even more confused. What do? You put away the guidebook. Again, we have free will. Put away the guidebook. Sit with the cards. Listen to what she's, look at their expressions. Where are they standing? What are they touching? What are they holding? How do you feel like they're, how are they interacting with each other? Come away from the guidebook and really allow yourself to sink into the image. Allow that intuition to play. And I think another important thing to recognize is that this process of making a reading, of making tarot in general less complicated can be difficult. It's like exercising a muscle. You have to practice at it. And you have to recognize that sometimes, even after all of these methods, you still might not get it. And it's okay to just put away the cards. It really is. It is okay to put away the cards. They're just cards, right? Like, we can get so much out of them, and enjoyment and messages and insightful wisdom. But at the end of the day, if they are too much, just put them away. If it's too difficult, put it away. It's okay. Tomorrow's a different day. Later today is a different day. You will be okay if you put away the cards. I think something else that we have to remember is embracing the confusion. I know that sounds contradictory, but being able to acknowledge that a card is confusing or difficult or doesn't make sense, I think that's part of the process. Acknowledging to yourself that, okay, well, this literally doesn't make sense. Just being able to say that to yourself and not forcing yourself or beating yourself up for not understanding it. I think there's a lot to say about that. And you know what? Maybe the lesson of this card for this day in this moment is to force you to acknowledge that you don't know all the things. Maybe that's the message. And it could be as simple as that. So I'm curious if you guys have any examples of difficult readings, if you have tips and tricks, things that you go to. Do you have something that you consistently go to, a method that you consistently use when you come across a difficult reading? And honestly, I would love to hear how you deal with any of these situations if you read for other people, because I've mentioned a couple times, I don't read for other people yet. And that's something I'm curious about, like how you deal with it when you pull, your 2 or 3 cards for someone else and it's not making sense and they're waiting for you to speak and you've got nothing. How do you handle that? I'd be curious. So I think that's kind of all I have today. Next week will be the third installment of my perimenopause series. I'm not quite sure yet what the video will be on, but that's what's coming up next week. So if you have stuck through all of my rambling, I appreciate you, and I'm glad you're here, and I hope you're enjoying this March. Oh, it's not March anymore. I hope you're enjoying your April so far, and I will catch up with you guys next week.